I never thought my words would be found. I never thought anyone would care to read the thoughts of a boy who once laughed and played like every other child in the village. But as the days grew darker and the whispers turned into heavy silences, I began to write. It was the only way I could hold on to the world that was slipping through my fingers. My name is Tomas, and this is the diary of the 14 children who never returned. We lived in a small town surrounded by hills, the kind that caught the sun each morning and painted the sky orange. Our houses were made of stone, our lives stitched together by routines that felt unshakable. In the evenings, we played in the fields until our mothers called us back for supper. The world felt large but safe, and our group of 14 children was the heart of it. There was Anna, with her golden braids and the voice that carried louder than the church bell. Jakob, who could carve wooden animals that looked ready to leap from your hand. Lena, who read books no one else dared to open, her eyes always wandering toward the horizon. Then there was my younger brother, Emil, who trailed after me like a shadow, his laughter echoing across the fields. Each of us was different, but together we were whole. The grown-ups told stories about wars, hunger, and storms that came long before we were born. They spoke of years when children had to hide, when voices had to be silenced, and when fear was stronger than love. But to us, those were distant legends, spoken in hushed tones we only half believed. We thought we were untouchable. Children often do. It was in the autumn of 1941 when everything began to change. The trees shed their leaves earlier that year, the air colder, sharper. Strangers arrived in the village, men in uniforms whose eyes didn't soften when they looked at us. They carried papers, gave orders, and walked with a rhythm that broke the peace we had always known. The adults lowered their voices even further, and the laughter of the town grew thinner. We, the children, didn't understand. Not truly, but we felt it. The games we played no longer carried the same joy. The sound of boots on cobblestone silenced our songs. At night, when I lay beside Emil, I could hear our mother whispering to father, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. One morning, a notice was pinned to the wooden post in the square. People gathered around it, their faces pale, their lips pressed tight. When I asked what it said, no one would tell me. But I saw the way mothers clutched their children tighter, and I knew the words were heavy. Soon after, they came for names. A man with a book stood in the square, calling out surnames while others scribbled with pens. My father's hand squeezed my shoulder when our name was called. I remember how his fingers trembled, though his voice was steady. We were counted, measured, sorted into lists I could not understand. It was then that our group of 14 became bound by something we had never felt before, fear. Yet even fear could not silence our need to be children. We met in the fields less often, always careful, but when we did, it was as though we were trying to hold on to a world we knew was slipping away. Anna whispered that her mother said families might have to leave soon. Jakob swore he heard his. Father say the word transport. Lena, always braver than the rest, said that if such a thing happened, she would find a way back. None of us believed it, but her determination gave us hope. The first family to disappear was the Weisses. Their home stood empty the next morning. The windows shuttered, the door unlocked. No one spoke of it, but the silence spread through the village like a sickness. Soon after, another family was gone. And then another. I began writing because I could not let myself forget. Each name, each face, each laugh deserved to be remembered. Emil asked me once what I was scribbling, and I told him I was making sure our games and our secrets would not vanish, even if we did. He nodded, though I don't think he fully understood. Then came the morning the soldiers marched us toward the square. Their boots struck the earth in unison, and the sun seemed to hide behind clouds. Mothers held children, fathers carried bundles, and the air was thick with confusion. I clutched Emil's hand so tightly that my fingers hurt. We stood there for hours. The soldiers called names again, checked lists, pointed people toward wagons. Some were told to stay, some were told to leave. The leaving was always final. That day, 3 of the children in our group were taken away with their families. We never saw them again. I remember Lena's eyes as she watched them go. They did not cry, though mine burned with tears I refused to let fall. "We'll remember them," she whispered. "If we keep their names alive, they are not gone." I wanted to believe her, but more names were called. More wagons filled. Each departure carved a hole in our group, a hole too wide to fill. We played less, laughed less, spoke less. And yet in the silence of our shrinking circle, the bond between us grew sharper, like iron forged in fire. I did not yet know that we were becoming part of a story that would be written in shadows and grief. A story that would one day be told, not as legend but as truth. A story of 14 children who never returned. I wrote these words by candlelight, my hands cold, my heart heavy. Outside, the world was changing, and we were powerless to stop it. But here, on these pages, we still existed. We still played. We still lived. And I swore to myself that even if we vanished, this diary would not, because memory is the only way we could remain. The night after the wagons left, the village felt hollow. Even the wind that passed through the streets seemed unwilling to stir the silence. I sat at the wooden table with Emil, a candle flickering between us, and tried to keep my hand steady as I wrote. My words were messy, my letters uneven, but I pressed them onto the page with determination, as if I could trap the moments before they slipped away. Emil leaned his head against my shoulder and whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" He was speaking of Anna, Jakob, and Ruth, 3 of our 14 who had been taken that morning. I did not answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I did not know how. Hope was a fragile thing, and even at 12 years old, I understood it could shatter too easily. Our mother tried to soothe us with soft words. She said that maybe the families were taken to work, maybe they would return when the snow melted. But her eyes betrayed her. They held a weight I had never seen before, a fear that no gentle story could cover. Father sat quietly by the fire, his pipe unlit, staring at the floorboards as though they might reveal some secret. The next day, soldiers returned. They went door to door, checking lists, peering into rooms as though searching for hidden truths. Emil clung to me when they entered our home, their heavy boots leaving marks on our wooden floor. They asked for papers, names, ages. Father handed everything over with trembling hands, though he tried to appear calm. When they left, Mother collapsed into a chair, her face pale. In the days that followed, we children tried to cling to what was left of our old life. We met by the river far, from the ears of soldiers, where we could still feel like ourselves. There were only 11 of us now, but we pretended it was the same. Lena read aloud from one of her books, her voice carrying a strength that comforted us. She said that stories had the power to keep people alive, even when they were gone. I believed her. One afternoon, while we were by the river, Samuel, the oldest of our group at 14, said something that made us all fall silent. He said, "What if we are next?" None of us wanted to think about it, but the thought had been growing quietly in each of our minds. We looked at one another, our faces pale, our laughter suddenly lost. That was the first time I realized that even children could feel the shadow of destiny. The seasons changed quickly that year. Winter arrived early, bringing with it a cold that seeped into our bones. Food grew scarce. Mothers stood in long lines for bread, sometimes returning with nothing. Fathers whispered about hiding, about running, but the soldiers seemed to know every step before it was taken. Still, We children found ways to steal moments of freedom. We built snow figures in the fields, our frozen hands shaping them into strange creatures that made us laugh. We told stories around tiny fires we dared to light, stories of places where children never had to be afraid. In those moments, we forgot the wagons, the soldiers, the lists. We forgot the fear that crept into our homes each night. But forgetting never lasted long. One morning, more names were called in the square. This time it was Samuel and his family. I will never forget the look on his face as he stood with us for the last time. He was older, braver, and he tried to smile as though to tell us not to worry. "Write about me," he whispered to me when no one else could hear. "Don't let them erase me." And then he was gone. 10 children remained. I wrote Samuel's name in large letters in my diary that night, pressing hard with the pencil so it would never fade. Emil watched me and asked again if they would return. My silence was my answer, though I wished I had words to protect him from the truth. The winter deepened, and with it, the silence in our homes. Fewer families remained in the village. Empty. Houses lined the streets like broken teeth. At night, the sound of wagons echoed through the distance, and we pulled our blankets tighter, praying our names would not be called next. It was around this time that Father began to speak of hiding. He said he had heard rumors that some families had escaped to the forest, building shelters among the trees. Mother looked terrified at the thought, but Father insisted that staying meant waiting for the inevitable. They argued late into the night, while Emil and I lay awake, listening. Meanwhile, Lena became our leader. She told us that we must remember everything, every laugh, every game, every name. She said that if we kept the memories alive, even if we were taken, we would not truly vanish. I began to believe that perhaps my diary was not just mine, but all of ours, a way to hold on to the 14, even as our number dwindled. One evening, as the snow fell in thick sheets, we gathered in the old barn at the edge of the village. 10 of us huddled together for warmth, telling stories in whispers. Emil fell, asleep against my side, his breath soft, his face peaceful despite the storm outside. I looked at each of my friends, their faces glowing in the candlelight, and I wondered how many of us would still be together when spring came. We were children, but we were no longer only children. Fear had aged us, stolen the simplicity of our games, replaced our laughter with whispers. Still, in that barn, for a few fleeting hours, we were whole again. We were not names on a list. We were not shadows in the snow. We were simply children, holding on to one another in a world that seemed determined to tear us apart. That night, as I wrote by the dim candlelight, I made a promise. I promised that no matter what happened, I would keep writing. I would remember every name, every smile, every word whispered in the dark, because even if the world forgot us, my diary would not. 10 of us remained, but for how long, none of us knew. By the time spring arrived, the snow had melted into streams that ran through the cobblestones, carrying with them the silence of a village half-emptied. The square no longer rang with chatter, the market stalls were abandoned, and the air smelled of damp earth and smoke. I remember standing at the edge of the river one morning with Emil, watching the water rush past, and realizing that nothing around us was the same. There were only 10 of us left now. 10 children who clung together as if holding onto a rope fraying at the edges. Every time we gathered, we looked for the missing faces, half expecting them to appear from behind a tree or walk down the street. But they never did. Their absence was louder than any words. Our parents grew more desperate. Whispers of escape filled the evenings, carried from house to house in hushed voices. Some spoke of a camp, a place where people were being taken, a place from which no one returned. The adults never told us children the details, but we heard enough. We always heard enough. It was Lena who suggested we keep meeting no matter what. "If we let them take even this from us," she said, "then we've already lost." Her words carried a courage none of us could match. We followed her lead because we needed to believe that there was still something we could control. So we met in the fields, the barn, the riverbank, anywhere the soldiers would not think to look. One afternoon, while sitting in the tall grass, we decided to tell our dreams for the future, as if speaking them aloud could make them real. Anna was gone, but I remembered what she once told me. She wanted to become a teacher, to fill classrooms with laughter. Jakob had dreamed of being a carpenter, his hands shaping wood into life. Samuel had wanted to travel, to see mountains beyond the horizon. Among those of us who remained, Emil whispered that he wanted nothing more than to grow old with me, to always stay by my side. Lena said she dreamed of writing books that no soldier could ever burn. Little David, the youngest at only 7, said he wanted to own a bakery so the village would always smell of bread. We laughed softly at that, the sound fragile but real. In that moment, we weren't afraid. We were simply children with dreams. But reality always returned. The soldiers grew stricter. They no longer just called names in the square. They came at night. Boots stomped against doors, voices shouted, and wagons rolled away into the darkness. I would hold Emil close during those nights, covering his ears so he would not hear the cries of families being torn apart. It was during one of those nights that we lost Miriam and her family. She had been one of the quieter children, but her laugh was the kind that made others laugh with her. When the soldiers came, they gave her family little time. The next morning, her window was empty, her door open. Another space in our circle had vanished. 9 remained. The weight of it grew heavier. Each loss was like a stone placed on our backs, bending us lower, but we refused to break. Lena kept reminding us, if we keep their names alive, they're still with us. So I wrote Miriam's name in my diary, pressing the pencil so hard it nearly tore the page. One evening, Father returned home with a bundle of bread and whispered words. The forest. He said there were people hiding there, building shelters, surviving away from the soldiers. Mother looked terrified, but Father's eyes burned with determination. He said staying meant waiting for the knock at our door, and he would not allow Emil and me to be taken without a fight. The idea of leaving our home was unbearable. I looked at the walls I had grown up within, the chair where Emil always sat, the hearth where Mother cooked. How could we abandon it all? Yet the thought of wagons and names on lists made my stomach twist. That week, Lena gathered us and said her family was thinking the same. She looked at me and whispered, "If we go, promise you'll write. Promise you'll keep us alive on those pages." I promised, though I feared my words were too weak against the world closing in on us. The day before we were meant to leave, we met one last time by the river. The sun was low, painting the water gold, and for a moment, it felt like the world had forgotten the soldiers. We skipped stones, told jokes, even sang quietly, our voices mingling with the rush of water. I remember Emil laughing so hard he fell into the grass, his face glowing with a joy I had not seen in months. That night, I wrote about it carefully, each detail, each laugh, because I knew it might be the last time we felt that way. The last time the circle of 9 children still felt whole. The next morning, before dawn, wagons entered the village again. We heard them before we saw them, the creak of wheels, the crack of whips. Father's face went pale. He whispered for us to pack quickly. Mother stuffed bread and blankets into a sack, her hands shaking. Emil grabbed my hand and would not let go. We did not make it to the forest that day. The soldiers were everywhere. They searched the streets, pulled people from their homes, shouted orders in harsh voices. Families were herded into the square once more, names checked against the lists. I felt Emil's hand trembling in mine as we stood with the others, our breaths shallow. That morning, 2 more children from our circle were taken. Ruth's younger brothers, Aaron and David, barely had time to cry before their family was ordered into a wagon. I will never forget the sight of their mother trying to comfort them as the soldiers pushed them forward. 7 remained. That night, I wrote until my hand ached. I wrote every detail of their faces, their voices, the way David had laughed about, bread by the river. I pressed their memory into the paper as though the pencil itself could hold them there forever. The circle of 14 had become 7. And though we tried to stay brave, I could see it in everyone's eyes. We knew it would, not stop. The square no longer frightened me the way it once had. By then, fear had become a part of life, stitched into every breath, every glance over our shoulders. It was no longer sudden, no longer sharp. It was constant, heavy, like carrying a stone that pressed against our chests day and night. 7 of us remained, and each time we gathered, we counted one another quietly, afraid of who might not appear the next time. Spring turned into summer, but the warmth brought no relief. The sun burned against the fields, yet the village seemed colder than ever. Soldiers still patrolled the streets, their shadows stretching longer with each passing day. Houses stood empty, shutters closed, doors unlatched, as though they were waiting for their families to return. But no one ever did. Father grew restless. He spoke more often of the forest, of leaving before our names were called. Mother argued that leaving was just as dangerous, that soldiers hunted those who ran, and not all who fled survived. Their whispers at night kept Emil awake, and he would press close to me, asking if Father was right. I told him yes, though. I wasn't sure myself. We children clung tighter to one another that summer. We met in smaller groups now, afraid that soldiers would notice us if all 7 gathered at once. Sometimes it was just me, Emil, and Lena, sitting in the tall grass where the road bent away from the village. Other times it was with Ruth, who had grown quiet since losing her brothers, her laughter replaced by silence. We no longer played games. We no longer sang. We only spoke in hushed voices, sharing memories, reminding each other of the children we had already lost. I filled page after page in my diary. At times I wrote until my pencil grew dull, my hand cramping. But I refused to stop. I listed names, ages, dreams. I described the way Samuel had smiled even when he was afraid. The way Anna's voice used to echo across the hills. The way David's hands were always sticky with bread. Every memory became a weapon against forgetting. Every word was a refusal to let them vanish completely. One hot afternoon, Emil asked me a question that left me silent for hours. He said, "If we're taken too, will someone write about us?" I looked at him, his eyes wide with fear, and I realized he was old enough to understand what was happening. I told him yes, of course. I told him someone would always remember us. But inside, I wondered if my diary was the only chance we had to be remembered at all. It was around that time that Lena brought us news she had overheard. She said there was a new order, that more families would soon be forced onto wagons. She didn't know who would be chosen, but her words spread through us like fire. That night, Father decided we would leave for the forest. He said it was no longer a choice, but a necessity. Mother cried as she packed, though she tried to hide it from us. Emil and I helped gather what little we could carry. Blankets, bread, a jug of water. We never made it. The soldiers came before dawn, pounding on doors, shouting names. Father tried to hide us in the cellar, but the boots were everywhere. The voices louder than thunder. They pulled us into the street, where dozens of families were already gathered, their belongings scattered at their feet. Emil clutched my hand, his face pressed into my sleeve. I saw Ruth and her mother there, too. Ruth looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and I knew then that her name had been called as well. One by one, families were ordered toward the wagons. The soldiers shoved people forward, ignoring their cries. Some begged to stay, others tried to run, but none succeeded. When it was Ruth's turn, she tried to smile at me, though her lips trembled. "Write about me," she whispered as she passed. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her back, but I couldn't. The soldiers pushed her into the wagon, and then she was gone. 6 remained. That night, when we returned home, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was unbearable. I lit a candle and wrote Ruth's name in my diary, my tears smudging the letters. Emil sat beside me, his face pale, his eyes distant. "How many more?" he asked. I didn't answer. The days blurred after that. The soldiers came again and again, each time taking more families, more children. The village grew quieter until even the birds seemed to have vanished. The circle of 14 had shrunk to 6, and we knew the number would only fall again. One evening, Lena gathered the remaining of us in the barn. She looked at each of us with a determination that frightened me. "We have to leave," she said. "We can't wait for them to come again." Her father, she told us, had already made plans to flee into the forest, and she begged us to join them. Emil looked at me, his eyes pleading, but father shook his head when we told him. He said the soldiers would catch us, that the forest was too dangerous. Mother agreed, though her voice broke when she spoke. That night I lay awake listening to them argue, my chest heavy with fear. A few days later, Lena was gone. Her family left in the night, slipping into the darkness without a word. Some whispered that they had been caught, others that they had made it to the forest. No one knew, but she never came back. 5 remained. I wrote about Lena until my pencil snapped. I wrote about her courage, her voice, her stubborn hope. I wrote until the candle burned low and my eyes ached. Emil watched me quietly, his small hands folded in his lap. "Do you think she made it?" he asked. I wanted to tell him yes. I wanted to believe it myself. But all I could do was pull him close and whisper, "I hope so." The circle of children was shrinking faster now. We felt it every day, like sand slipping through our fingers. The wagons still came. The soldiers still shouted names. And every night I wrote, because it was the only way I knew how to fight against the silence that was consuming us all. 5 of us remained, but in my diary, all 14 still lived. The summer heat pressed down on the village, but even under the blazing sun, the streets felt cold. By then, 5 of us were left, 5 children out of 14. Each time we met, we carried the silence of those who were gone. We no longer asked whether they would return. We already knew the answer. We only asked how long until it was our turn. I still remember the faces of the ones who were left. There was Emil, my younger brother, always at my side, his small hand clutching mine as though it could keep us safe. There was Sarah, with dark eyes that never stopped searching the horizon, as if waiting for someone she knew would never come back. There was Isaac, quiet and thin, who rarely spoke anymore but still followed us wherever we went. And there was Miriam, another Miriam, not the one who had been taken earlier, who hummed songs under her breath when she thought no one was listening. And then there was me, Thomas, clutching this diary as if it were a lifeline. We gathered less often now, too afraid of being noticed by soldiers. When we did meet, it was in hidden corners, behind the broken fence near the fields, in the shadow of the old barn, sometimes even in my family's cellar when Father allowed it. We didn't play anymore. Instead, we shared memories of the others, Anna's laugh, Jacob's carvings, Samuel's courage, Lena's stubborn hope. Each story was a way to keep them alive, even if only in whispers. One evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the sky red, Emil asked a question that made my chest ache. He said, "When all of us are gone, who will remember?" I held my diary up and told him, "This will." But even as I said it, I wondered if paper and pencil were strong enough to carry so many voices. The soldiers grew harsher as summer stretched on. They no longer bothered with lists in the square. They came whenever they wished, dragging families into the street, their shouts echoing through the night. We learned to listen for the sound of boots, to stay still in the dark, to hold our breath until silence returned. Emil would bury his face against me, trembling, while I whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. And then, one night, Sarah's family was taken. I can still see her face in the candlelight, pressed against the window as the soldiers shouted at her parents. She caught my eye as the wagon door slammed shut, her dark eyes wide, filled with a terror I will never forget. She didn't speak, but her gaze said everything. "Remember me." 4 remained. The next morning, I wrote her name again and again until the page was filled. Emil sat beside me in silence. He didn't ask if she would come back. He didn't need. To life in the village grew emptier. Fewer voices, fewer faces. Even the adults stopped speaking as much. People walked quickly, heads down, as though trying to disappear before the soldiers noticed them. Every corner of the village felt haunted by absence. It was during those days that Isaac began to change. He was always quiet, but now he seemed like a shadow. He barely ate, barely spoke. His eyes had grown distant, as if he had already left even though he was still with us. One afternoon, when we sat together by the riverbank, he finally spoke. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I don't think I'll be here much longer." None of us knew how to answer. A week later, he and his family were gone. No one saw them leave. Some said the soldiers took them at dawn. Others said they left on their own to try to reach the forest. But either way, Isaac was gone. 3 remained. It was just Emil, Miriam, and me now. 3 out of 14. When we gathered, the silence felt unbearable, like standing in a room filled with ghosts. Miriam tried to hum her songs, but they sounded fragile, as if the notes might shatter in the air. Emil no longer laughed the way he once did. He stayed close to me, his eyes wide and watchful, as though afraid the world might steal me from him too. One night, Father told us that we had waited too long. He said the forest was our only chance now, even if it was already too dangerous. Mother cried quietly, her hands covering her face. But Father's voice was steady. He said he would rather die running than wait for soldiers to knock on our door. That night, I wrote by candlelight, my hands shaking. I wrote the names of all 11 children who were already gone, filling the page with their memories. Then I wrote about Emil and Miriam, about Father's plan, about my own fear. I wanted to leave behind every detail in case this diary was the only thing that survived. We prepared quietly. Bread, water, blankets. Mother wrapped them in a sack. Emil asked if we would take the diary too, and I told him yes. More than anything else, I knew it had to come with us. But before we could leave, the soldiers came again. It was late at night when the sound of boots thundered against the street. Father pushed us toward the cellar, but it was too late. The door burst open, shouts filled the house, and soldiers flooded inside. Emil clung to me, crying silently into my sleeve. Miriam's family was dragged out too, their voices rising in panic. That night, Miriam was taken. I saw her face one last time as the soldiers pushed her into the wagon, her small hands reaching toward us. Her song, the one she always hummed, hung in the air for a moment before the wagon door slammed shut. 2 remained. Just Emil and me. I held him close as the wagons rolled away, whispering his name over and over as if that alone could keep us safe. When the soldiers finally left, silence filled the village once again. Only 2 of us were left, out of 14. That night, I could barely write. My hands shook too much, and the words blurred through my tears. But I forced them onto the page, because I had to. Because Miriam deserved to be remembered. Because all of them did. The circle was almost gone. Only Emile and I remained.